Assalamualaikum, اسمي Elizabeth. Damn it. مرحبا بكم في أداة المحاضرة, which is, hello, my name is Elizabeth, or Liz for short, and welcome to our discussion. So the idea of this is to explain how the experience affects us right from the get-go of code and then moves us on into the front end and the whole experience of our users. So a little bit about me. I'm a client integration engineer, which is a lot posher than it actually is. So I'm also a Java dev, and I build interactive voice menus for phones in Node.js. And I'm a dev by day and a UX by night. I'm trying to move careers as well. And my research projects are very much around different cultures and accessibility. So during this talk, we're going to go through things like the who, what, why, and what user experience is. We're also going to go through what it means to us as developers, how we can directly influence the experience of our products, and discover what actually Java itself will offer us. And obviously, how do we test this? So what is UX? So there are a lot of analogies on this. So this is something that someone I know tweeted. So sometimes it's a lemon, sometimes it's a tomato ketchup bowl, which is ridiculous. So how do we define something where even the industry doesn't even know what it is? But it is fundamental to everything. Your experiences from dealing with animals to cars to different services. A good API stems from good documentation. That is a good experience. So is it for us as developers? There's a role for this. So why should I be doing it? So usually the first thing is, it's not in my title, it's not my responsibility. But the experience of a product starts in your code. So if you have, how many of us have actually seen comments like, ew, or what is this in our code? Can I have a show of hands? Yeah, we've all been there. So the attitude around the code usually reflects the state of it, like how you onboard new people. Do you give them training? Do you just think you should be able to go do this? That's what we've hired you for. The attitude around the code then reflects on the quality of it. It usually turns into spaghetti code, and things like performance are massively affected because there's always a trade-off rate, and that's usually the first thing to go. And you also use your own product, right? I've been through a lot of issues where I've had to deal with live code, editing that, and we have a security feature, which means that it times out, doesn't save your work, and then you have to go redo it and log in again. That's a security feature, which is part of the user experience and building the trust with the user, and it pees me off on the other end, right? That's not what you want. So the experience of a product is completely formed by the whole team. It's not, you can't really say someone's in charge of the experience. They're not a unicorn, they're not doing everything. I don't care what Unicorn Hunt says. So which bits are UX? Which bits can we actually have an influence on? So performance. We multitask a lot more. We have a lot of gadgets. If we're not on our watches, we're on our phones, we're on our smart TVs. The numbers for performance are crucial. How many times have we been on like Reddit, an image is taken to load, it's like, nah, scroll past that. There's memes on this, on the performance. It is taken very seriously. After 3 seconds, 40% of users will drop off your product. And it also depends on the culture. If they are dependent on building trust with your brand, it's more important to that. If a site doesn't look like it works, why would you put your credit card details into that site? If it doesn't look like it works, you're not going to trust it. I'm not putting my payment details into that. Not a chance. And in addition to things like Google checking for your website to be responsive, it also takes page loader consideration when it gives you the search results. So it's also something to look at for like things like SEO and stuff like that. And another thing that I do a lot of research in is accessibility. So there are specific packages and libraries in things like Swing and JavaFX which have like certain methods that we can directly communicate with like the screen reader with. So especially if you're like an e-commerce website, if you have 15% of people suffering with a disability and globally, and 19% of the working population, so that doesn't even take into consideration people who are on DLA and can't work, that spending power is in the millions. So why would you cut off that community? So one of the other points as well for accessibility, if you're trying to bring it onto a project, the last reason should always be a legal obligation. As soon as you mention a law to anyone, it will just turn into a battlefield. And that's not really the attitude of accessibility. Well, it is, unfortunately. But, and also other things, when you're putting in content into your own website, it's actually using things like jargon has a massive impact on your experience. How many times have you had to look up a word for an API, or you've had to look into a glossary because you have absolutely no idea what they're talking about? If you're flicking to and from, that's a bad user experience, right? Readability also affects those with cognitive impairment, so learning disabilities, they're going to struggle a lot more. And in London alone, just think about how many cultures are in this room already, right? You can't guarantee that your user is going to be English. They're not going to be native. So this leads me on to internationalization. We are more global than ever. We are more closely connected, especially in my cultural research. I can do it just in London. I've made Swedish friends on the tube just by guessing it wasn't Norwegian. It's pretty easy, I guess. But that means our layouts and stuff have to be flexible enough for different labels. They have to be taken into consideration if the language is actually longer, like German or Dutch. They are huge words. Validation, there's actually quite a few blog posts on the things that programmers expect, what considered to be normal, like we don't expect numbers to be entered into a name field. Well, that's not true. And in China, there are 8 official languages. That is huge. Like, if you were building a Chinese website, would you ever consider Portuguese as one of the languages? But only because of one province that actually makes it onto the list of being official. And I'm half Portuguese, so that's like it's a little win for me. Anyway, so going back to the London thing again, we have 270 nationalities according to the London Evening Standard, and 300 different languages in London alone. That on a map is absolutely mental. So you can see like the experience again is not going to be cross-culture or cross-platform. So it is quite important when that we need to take this into account. So where does Java fit in with all of this? So my academic background comes from Java Swing. I'm not sure if that's going to be helpful to anyone, but we'll go with it. So this is one of the first things that I came across, that you can have like, there's an accessibility package dedicated to making sure that components describe what they are, what they do, and what state they're in. So you have like the accessible context, and then you can set descriptions on it and stuff like that. So you have the context role and things like that. There's a Java demo as well later on. And JavaFX is like the next front-endy sort of thing. So they have a completely extensive set of accessible components and libraries. In addition to accessibility as well, they also have libraries which take care of like different time zones and different currencies. If anyone's seen a time zone video on YouTube, it is like mind-blowing. It's absolutely just mental to take into consideration. So it's good to know that things are out there to help you with that, and people have already solved that problem. I'm not sure if I like the way that JavaFX is doing it. I don't understand why I need a button and a special button which is accessible, but that's a Java design flaw that we might fix at a future date. You never know. And the third thing I wanted to look at in terms of Java was Android. They have like 2 different types of checklists of like ones that you're developing and how to test it. And it's a different sort of experience that you have to take into consideration. So I worked for ThoughtWorks, and we did a pitch to a construction company. And obviously we had to check and make sure that buttons were of a certain size, because obviously you're on a construction site, you're not going to bash out a laptop and just be like, I want to drill. You're going to be on your phone and you're going to have a massive thumb, right? So you need the button space for that. It's a different sort of experience, but obviously as a developer, you're the one who's building the sizes of that button and paddings and stuff like that. So there's like a few code examples of the process that needs to run. So there's one that we'll take into consideration. It's like a process that runs in the background and will wait for accessibility events to happen. It's also a good thing to make sure that you can access everything via typing or via touching. In the same way that if you're like in Vim, another thing to take into consideration is like keyboard only or mouse only navigation, because that's basic usability, right? There's like a massive overlap. So, yeah. So how does HTML fit in? Obviously, there's the front end. We're not just one-trick ponies, right? We do a lot of things. So HTML. So first of all, semantic structure. I worked on thoughtworks.com and saw that we decided to highlight that our service had gone live by splitting up our content into a paragraph, a header, and a paragraph. That does not make sense, because to a screen reader, you can have like these shortcuts that will request for just headers or just the links. So how many of us have actually gone to a Wikipedia page and not scanned and read every single word? No, you ain't got time for that. So what you need to make sure is that your content makes sense. It's in an order, it has a flow. That is something that we have to build, right, in our code. So one of the things I wanted to do as well was like screen reader first technique, whereas you can read a page out to someone, and if they can build a mental model of that page and the content makes sense, then you've got it nailed, right? It's like what you do with pseudocode. If you have a complex problem, you read it out. Or if it's in Java, you can translate it to pseudocode, see if that makes sense. It's just different ways of doing it. But that's still the experience of like breaking down the logic and getting it into the code, right? Yeah. And also it's good practice, right? If you want to do like good HTML and good code and for it to make sense, then good content starts from that. So again, it's going back to the attitude of the code, making sure that makes sense and it's pretty solid. And languages. So this is something I recently came across, was obviously companies now are more global than ever, and it's really nice to show that. And it's also nice to have like lots of different languages for all the target audiences that you're going for. So if you've got like an office in Brazil, you want to show off that you're reaching the Portuguese community. So you want to have like, look at our fancy blog posts in Spanish or Portuguese. And look over here, we've got an office in Turkey because they're blossoming. So what you can do is you have your set page to be obviously your main language. So you have, I realise that's like Latin. Oh, no, it's actually English. But, and then obviously you can then go into like paragraphs and set the language attribute on other blocks as well. So you can say that this is German. This means that a screen reader as well will not try to pronounce German words with an English accent and get the words wrong. That sounds dodgy. So, yeah. And I also got told by another Hungarian guy that always set like the char set of your page, because they have like 44 characters in their language, which is mental. So you can't always guarantee what language your user is going to be using as well, even in London. So the repeated links as well is another thing. The read more doesn't work, doesn't really help anyone. And not only is this bad in terms of accessibility for screen readers, because they can just request links, right? So they'll always use like a list of links. It'll be like, click here, click here, click here. It's not helping anyone. So in addition to that, you also have the cognitive impairment. If you're distracted, especially if you're like a parent, you've got like kids go running around, and then you have, you just want to be able to like glance at something and click, that's what I need, that's the link, that's what I want to be downloading. If it's the only link on there, fine, but still add context. You're not guaranteeing that the link has context. Yeah. So one of the biggest things as well for code in terms of accessibility is ARIA tags, which is application-rich internet applications. And this is how you define the different sections of your code, of your page. So you have like, this is a banner. So in addition to this, you also have, if an image is in the content, so basically not in the CSS, you have to at least declare an alt tag of empty, which means that it's purely decorative, instead of just having nothing, and then it will read out the file name. And img_2593 means nothing. So in addition to that, you also have like roles and states and properties. So properties extends the already like HTML of required true, things like that. You have states, so for things like checkboxes which don't have an attachment as to what state they're in, the text obviously just means like, you know, is checked, but you're not going to see that. You need to tell it what state it's in, checked or not. And then the roles, which are like main, banner, navigation, things like that. So how do we test this? One of the ways is by actually just turning VoiceOver on. So if you do actually command F5 on a Mac. Okay, so can't hear it. However, you can see what it's saying on there. So you'll notice that for a start, this is done in Czech because that's classed as a higher context language, which means they basically need more context when getting things across, and they also have longer words. So if you obviously don't build layouts, you're going to get things like quite buggy. It doesn't stretch. Also, you'll see like the screen reader just says edit text blank. If you wait for a while, it will also tell you the help text, and if you haven't filled that out, it just says that. That's not going to help anyone. So the accessible one, so it has like, you can do like extra tooltips. Why is it not? Oh, why? No. There we go. So you have like for name, it will tell you what text field you're on. It will tell you things like help text. So there we go. Why are you all the way though? So here we go. Basically all it is basically one line. So you have like your accessible context, you have your set accessible description, and then you can have your help text, you can have the tooltips, and then you can directly communicate basically with the screen reader. The idea was that you closed your eyes and it sort of made more of an impact. So imagine that bit, be fine. Yeah. Okay. So the other point to iterate is a lot of non-functional requirements like accessibility and security are not a one-time concern. Obviously your code changes, behavior changes, more functionality gets added, they all need to be retested. So how do we do that? So a cheap option is, well, this is free, so it's very cheap. This is a continuous accessibility like monitoring tool, so it'll give you like graphs and it will show you, it's quite an achievement when you get like the graph down. You try to poo your pants when you're an intern on an accessibility project and it peaks like that, and then you get to blame your team. But that's probably not a good way forward. No blame games. So this is called Pally. We actually got this to set up as part of our build tool, and it provisioned itself using Puppet. So it ran every so often with a cron job, and then it would tell us on a monthly basis like how well we were doing in terms of errors. It was also nice that it narrowed it down page by page. So it didn't spider through things. We weren't really overwhelmed with like hundreds and thousands of errors that we thought we were going to have to fix like straight away. We also could control the level of accessibility that it checked against. So there was 3 levels of WCAG, and they also had Section 508, which is an American law, which is for federal websites. So we're fine with that one. There is also Ali. And there is also Ali.js, which is another tool. I haven't used much of these either. Looks like they do pretty much the same job, but again, it's free, it's open source. It's a tool that will allow you to make sure it's continuous and makes you feel like an achievement as well. Always colourful. And the last thing that you do is you talk to people, you understand what their experiences are. Even if you're not able to talk to users, you can still go over and talk to the designer or the UX person and always question why you're doing things. Like, why do you want it in this way? Try and understand that. And if you go to these people, and it's really nice to share their achievements. So it's like MailChimp do a really great experience in that when you're about to send a marketing email to thousands of people, it has like a sweaty hand that's like really nervous when you press the big red button, and then when you finally send it, it will like rock on and it shares that achievement with you. That's a good experience. That's memorable. It's been, you know, spoken about in a talk. Woo. So this is actually a blind school that I worked with in Pune, which was amazing. And it was great to really understand how empowering things like accessibility is. It means so much more than just being able to tab onto everything. It's empowering. It means that it's independent. You can have a massive impact, even in the back end on the user experience. Like a bad example would be the Mars rover. Oh no, there's a NASA project which they use different measurements, like different metrics, and it went off course just a little bit, and they lost contact with a $1 billion project. So it's more serious than what it looks like initially. So, to summarize, the experience starts right from the beginning. And just because it's not in your title doesn't mean it's not in your responsibility. You're going to use your own product, you have to test it. There are tools out there which will help you. This is not a new problem. And talk to people, question everything that you're doing. Make sure it is worthwhile and don't build from a vision. Ta-da! Any questions?
The open source tools that you spoke about, are they tailored to any particular type of app? Is like a web app or an Android app, or are they quite?
They are. I've only used them for web apps. I'm not sure if, because that was like 2 years ago now in my internship, so I'm not 100% sure if they've extended that. But yeah, it's tailored towards web apps. That one is anyway. Yeah.
I may have missed the context of the back end of this talk.
Okay.
So the type of talk is bringing the UX to the back end.
Yeah.
So I may have missed something about the back end.
So that was the bit about the methods that Java offers. So it's like getting your accessible context, setting the descriptions and stuff like that. So methods and classes, like in JavaFX, you have like accessible button, accessible slider, accessible panel, and they all extend like a parent accessible, I can't remember the word for it. And yeah, things like that.
Again, I'm a bit confused because JavaFX is a front end technology.
Java's backend.
Java itself is backend, but FX is front end. I mean, the reason why I'm asking this is because I am working on a project where we do build or build content at the backend that renders on different front ends. So I was very keen to try and understand the context of
What did you build in? Just Java in general?
We are building it in Scala. You could do it in Java or C# or anything. It's a set of services that sit in front of microservices that sit in front of the main service, and they consume the content, and then they produce that content or render that content in a format that different front ends or different users could actually consume them in the way they would want to consume them.
So taking away even like the Java stuff, performance again is huge, and that comes from what I've experienced. That's come from a lot of the state of the code. And again, that also affects like team morale. When you're seeing stuff, when you've just like gone to a new job and all you're seeing is like unit tests done in main methods that is in production. Like, that's terrible, right? I mean, that's not going to affect on the performance, but if you have like a low team morale and that has a knock-on effect, like that's the state of our code at my place and our product, XP called, they want their look and feel back, to be honest. So I'm not sure if that still answers your question, but there are other things like that.
You follow up pattern called EFF, backend front end pattern. Maybe you should read through that. I was probably thinking to stop in that context. But it's good anyway.
Thank you. I think everyone just wants to go to the pub.
Just one more question I had. Yeah. One aspect of ensuring that a website or a Swing application is usable is just checking that certain accessibility information is actually been defined for components. You had a demonstration where you showed how you might do that for Swing components.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you knew of any tools that would actually validate for a website or for a Swing application or a JavaFX application that all of the components have actually had those who have actually been set automatically. It'd be quite nice to say, just analyse my website for me, tell me which components.
So that is what Pally does.
Okay, that's what Pally does.
Yeah. I probably didn't explain that well then, but yeah. And also like just going through VoiceOver, like that was an easy thing, and obviously making sure, I mean, especially if you're a Vim user, you'll be very much like keyboard only because you don't have a choice. So just being able to like tab through everything and make sure that you can manipulate components that way as well is like a free, easy, like quick way to do it. Just make sure you can access everything by keyboard or mouse only. There's actually a guy who went blind for a week when using the web to really understand like how screen readers work, and he only used like a blindfold, and it's a bit extreme. But yeah, so there are other ways of doing that. Yeah.
So if you don't use something like Pally, how far would you get if you just use like the W3 standards tools that pick up on missing alt tags, for example? Will that get you most of the way there to having a more accessible site?
That depends as well on like who your target audience is and what your context is and the level that you actually need. Like if you're going to be a bank, doing the basics is not really going to help you become that much more accessible, if that makes sense. Yeah. But it's a good baby step, because like a lot of non-functional requirements, if people don't have the knowledge about them, then they become just bigger, and then they become scarier, and then they bring in the law argument, and it's just like, oh, do I really want to get into that? No. So it's a good tool to get you at least understanding, and then get into that point where you speak to users, and the only way to test it properly, right, is by actually speaking to a blind user. I can't really speak on behalf of them. Like I was told, I forgot to mention, but the ARIA tags, when I went to FOSDEM last year, they mentioned that ARIA tags are not just magical fairy dust that you can just sprinkle on your components in your HTML and make yourselves feel better and think, yes, this is making it accessible. It doesn't change the behavior in any way. It doesn't make sure that it's keyboard only navigable or mouse only accessible. So there's still that level of testing that needs to be there. Just because you're using the toolkits doesn't mean that you've nailed it. Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.